Bonsoir à tous. Juste quelques mots avant de donner la parole à Philippe Morel qui va vous présenter un peu la conférence et surtout à notre conférencier. Simplement pour le remercier parce qu'on est très honoré d'avoir ce soir qu'il ait accepté, donc à la demande notamment de Philippe, de venir pour une conférence. Donc Patrick Schumacher. Alors quelques mots, même si vous le connaissez sans doute, pour le présenter. Donc c'est un architecte et théoricien de l'architecture, donc qui est bien entendu basé à Londres. Donc, après ses études secondaires à Gerlingen, en Allemagne, Patrick Schumacher donc, étudie la philosophie et les mathématiques à l'université Friedrich Wilhelm de Bonn au début des années 80. Puis ensuite, donc, au milieu des années 80, il étudie l'architecture à Stuttgart et poursuit ses études à Southbank University de Londres. En 1988, encore étudiant, il rejoint l'agence d'architecture de Zaha Hadid, alors engagé dans la conception de la caserne de pompiers de la société Vitra en Suisse, que tout le monde connaît. Il s'agit du premier projet construit, bien sûr, par Zaha Hadid. En 1990, il retourne à l'université de Stuttgart pour obtenir son diplôme d'architecture avant de rejoindre définitivement ensuite l'agence de Zaha Hadid. Il obtiendra d'ailleurs plus tard, en 1999, son doctorat à l'Institut des sciences culturelles de l'Université de Klagenfurt. Depuis son incorporation à la fin des années 90, Schumacher a servi en tant que directeur de Zaha Hadid Architects et est crédité en tant que partenaire et co-auteur de la plupart des projets de l'agence. Depuis le décès tragique et inattendu de Zaha Hadid en avril 2016, il dirige à présent l'entreprise comme son seul partenaire actuellement en place. Voilà pour cette courte présentation et je le remercie bien sûr encore vraiment vivement au nom de l'école d'avoir accepté de venir ce soir et je donne peut-être la parole à Philippe pour quelques mots complémentaires. Voilà, merci à tous.
Merci pour cette introduction. Donc, je remercie à mon tour Patrick Schumacher pour avoir accepté donc, de venir faire cette conférence à Paris, qui me semble vraiment venir à un moment très important de sa carrière après la publication quand même d'un certain nombre de textes rassemblés principalement en fait, dans deux ouvrages qui sont une réelle tentative contemporaine de renouveler le genre du traité d'architecture, mais néanmoins dans la, on va dire, dans la quantité, mais la manière dont ces textes sont écrits renouvelle profondément donc le genre classique du traité. Donc Patrick Schumacher, comme Luc Liogier vient de l'énoncer, a enseigné quand même dans un certain nombre d'endroits, donc Kingston University, Columbia, Harvard, GSD, l'Université de l'Illinois à Chicago, la Yale School of Architecture, TU Berlin. Il a été, en l'occurrence, aussi le cofondateur en 1996 avec Brett Steele du AADRL, donc le Architectural Association Design Research Laboratory, qui a vraiment été un modèle inspirateur pour un grand nombre de programmes d'enseignement expérimentaux. Et donc, ne serait-ce que pour cette création, je suis vraiment honoré de voir Patrick Schumacher intervenir dans l'école. Pour très rapidement, en 2 minutes, vous présenter un petit peu donc, les approches théoriques de Patrick Schumacher. Alors, Patrick Schumacher a commencé son travail au sein de Zaha Hadid Architects, d'abord, on va dire, étiqueté un petit peu comme une architecte déconstructiviste, principalement grâce à l'exposition ou à cause, ça dépend parfois pour l'étiquetage, mais moi je pense que c'est plutôt grâce à l'exposition du MoMA, la célèbre exposition du MoMA. Ensuite, ce travail qui a toujours été en relation étroite entre les nouveaux moyens technologiques et l'expression architecturale a évolué. C'est là que Patrick Schumacher, d'après moi, a joué un rôle vraiment crucial en permettant toujours à Zaha Hadid de maintenir un lien extrêmement proche entre l'évolution des moyens, principalement digitaux, et les réalisations architecturales qui peuvent en être issues. Le travail de Patrick Schumacher a toujours été théorique, comme son parcours le témoigne, avec l'obtention, en l'occurrence, de son doctorat. Mais avec la lecture de Niklas Luhmann, le sociologue allemand, et une vision vraiment intégrative de la société actuelle, d'une société complexe, où tous les paramètres sont reliés les uns aux autres, Patrick Schumacher a développé sur un plan théorique le concept de paramétricisme qui vient se placer dans la lignée d'un autre concept extrêmement important qui est le concept de non-standard. Donc on sait que dans les premiers travaux de Patrick Schumacher, il y a vraiment une connexion très forte entre le non-standard et donc bien sûr la célèbre exposition qu'il y avait eu à Paris et le paramétricisme. Ensuite, le paramétricisme a évolué vers la définition d'une sorte de style global de l'époque, d'une époque complexe, d'une époque computationnelle. Et plus récemment, donc ça c'est des positions théoriques qu'il a principalement prises dans ses ouvrages principaux de 2010 et de 2012 sur l'autopoïèse de l'architecture. Donc le volume 1, c'est un nouveau cadre de travail pour l'architecture, et le volume 2 en 2012, c'est un nouvel agenda pour l'architecture. Donc, dans le premier volume, il développe ce concept de paramétricisme sous un angle stylistique, bien sûr toujours avec cette approche sémiotique et avec cette approche communicationnelle de l'architecture. Et plus récemment, le travail de Patrick Schumacher, je pense que je parle là des inflexions les plus récentes, a beaucoup porté sur l'analyse politique de l'architecture, le rôle de l'architecture dans la ville, le rôle de l'architecture au sein d'un monde qui est globalement capitaliste, en essayant de proposer une authentique critique de ce capitalisme, mais si possible constructive, qui renouvelle en fait les outils de cette critique. Et il définit actuellement donc le paramétricisme plus comme un concept qui est non plus stylistique, mais global, plus globalisant. Je pense que sur ce point, il y a des choses qui sont vraiment très très justes. Pas plus tard que hier, et à la suite de l'utilisation de Google Translate pour traduire le texte d'introduction de Patrick Schumacher, j'ai eu seulement 2 mots à corriger en l'occurrence. Un article scientifique disait que les logiciels de traduction qui reposent sur des modèles complexes et des réseaux neuronaux gèrent des millions de paramètres et que tout était dans le choix des paramètres. Donc ce concept de paramètres et de paramétricisme me semble tout à fait pertinent, bien qu'il reste potentiellement et évidemment et heureusement discutable. Donc voilà un petit peu. Je vous donne le titre de quelques conférences précédentes et ça va tout de suite vous donner un petit peu l'ampleur des travaux de Patrick Schumacher. Une conférence qui s'intitule « L'urbanisme au-delà du pouvoir néolibéral », la propriété et la société de la propriété et de la liberté, la pédagogie de Zahadid, l'école comme laboratoire, donc concept très important qu'il a évidemment mis en application, paramétricisme 2.0, de la fonctionnalité technique à la fonctionnalité sociale, composition et tectonique comme communication, faire de la logique de l'ingénierie quelque chose qui parle, et enfin l'âge de la méga-concentration et le futur de l'ordre urbain basé sur un marché ouvert. Donc on voit que très clairement les préoccupations de Patrick Schumacher sont larges, encore une fois, dans la plus grande tradition de l'architecture, telle qu'il me semble, en tout cas, doit être enseignée, pratiquée et investiguée. Voilà, donc je remercie Patrick et je lui laisse la parole. Merci.
Good evening. There's some more seats here in the front, by the way. This is going to be a long session. And there's more chairs here, by the way. So there's 5 more chairs here, and there's a few more chairs you could put in the front. I would just highly recommend that, because I'm speaking in Paris for the first time. Anyway, I didn't remember if I had ever spoken here. And yeah, let's bring in chairs. And thanks a lot, Philippe, for the introduction. And first of all, for inviting me. And thanks to you for introducing. Thanks for Frédéric to show up. Let's have a conversation. I don't speak French, but I got, and I more or less understood what Philippe was talking about. And I think he's gone through a series of key concepts and ambitions and agendas I associate with my theoretical and practical work. And this lecture is reasonably ambitious. I'm not going through all my themes, but through a number of them and try to connect them, since I never had the pleasure to speak here. So, the age of digital production is, in the most obvious way, is all the new tools we have to design, the media of design, the technological empowerment of the discipline itself, and that now more and more also affects the construction process as well, and that feeds back. But it's only one half of the equation. The age of digital production is not only reproducing, it's the whole society reproducing itself and producing through the digital media, and it changed the whole societal dynamics through the new economy which has been generated. So it's not only in terms of our tool set, but in our tasks. And what we are trying to structure and frame, namely social processes, have massively shifted. And that's why I mean totally new age, not only a new architectural age, but a new age, which requires a new architecture. And I think this new architecture would also require and absorb and utilize all the empowerment which has pushed the rest of society forward. And architects have been doing this for a long time and have been on the forefront of it. But more recently, there's been a lack of nerve, and a kind of conservatism has infected in the last 10 years the discipline, which I want to counter. So, architecture in the age of digital production, and I will also talk about tectonism, which is a subsidiary style within parametricism, which is the contemporary stage and most advanced subsegment and research program within parametricism. I will talk about that. And it has not yet arrived a lot in the real build works. And I'm talking about this in the context of what I call parametric semiology, which is a research project of mine, and a manifesto and thesis for where the discipline should evolve with respect to understanding that the semiological project, the way I will describe it, understanding the built environment as an information-rich communication and text of instructions which allows us to navigate, find each other in ever more intricate and diverse communication situations, is the project of the discipline and its core competency. So much for the title, but I wanted to start with Walter Benjamin because the title of this talk is a kind of mutation of the work of art in the age of mechanical reproduction or production. I mean, and that's important that the 20th century was the mechanical age and the 21st century is the digital or computational age. And he has, at the beginning of the 20th century, well, in the 1920s, and early, in this theorized this, and in the 36 put out this famous article, which becomes a kind of reference point. But I also like a lot, and have been influenced by another article which was less famous by Benjamin, called "The Author as Producer," which continues some of the themes, and the themes are relevant today, I think. So these are the themes we could draw from Walter Benjamin. So first of all, production technology as primary transformative force, general Marxist theme. The question of the social function of art and other disciplines, and for me, the question of the societal function of architecture is primary. New media transforming modes of perception, and for me this is also the new media. He was talking primarily about photography and film, and as offering a whole new perception and documentary film and filmmaking. life. And for me, it is the media which we have to represent our work to ourselves, and simulation media as well as VR, etc. The next point is very important. Innovating artistic forms of communication is more progressive than progressive content. So I am in the tradition of a progressive, meaning I'm invested in pushing the project of humanity forward in terms of emancipation, enlightenment, degrees of freedom, prosperity for all. So I'm pushing progress forward, and the realization that this is not something which one can only do by having the right opinions, the right statements, the right alignments with progressive forces, but one has to really work on the drivers, which are technological drivers. And that was a very important point of Benjamin's. And I also say this in the context of kind of retrograde investments in the discipline, which might have progressive ideas, but very conservative and regressive modes of working on these ideas. And then the last point for him was the new significance of the masses, meaning there's certain social formations which become relevant for the first time in the 20th century, which are behind the force behind modernism. And there has been a major shift where we don't talk about the masses anymore, we're talking about maybe the multitudes. So production technology is primary transformative force. I don't want to say too much. It's a general Marxist theme. There's this distinction between base and superstructure. The production technologies become very, very important. And in the end, it changes everything. It changes values, morals and mores, ideologies, ideas. And the mediating between these two is the social relations which have to be reshaped through new production technology potentials. And he is applying this very much to also the production of the creative industry of the arts in his point of view. And there was a delay factor where some of these technologies like photography and film had emerged much earlier and now finally push through and make major shifts in his theme topic of the arts. So he's talking about that on an ideological front in terms of the superstructure of the arts. Traditional concepts like creativity, genius, or everlasting value have kind of been wiped out, have been shifted. And there's a new social function for art. He's talking about a historical upheaval and the alteration of the function of art. And he thinks that the whole debate, which photography in particular, as well as mechanical reproduction through the print media, engendered whether photography is art, is misconceived because the whole concept of art has been radically transformed through this. And just as a note, it's not my key topic, but I think it's important that the visual arts, in particular painting, but also sculpture, was in a sense its traditional everyday social function of informing, recording events and contents has been superseded by photography. So it was kind of cut loose and left running idle and had to find a new function for itself, and it kind of found this idea, led to the founding of the ideology of a l'art pour l'art, where this was reflected and made a kind of positive value, that absence of determinate function. And I think that's very important and potent observation. And this is something which I've been always interested in, to make clear that the art world and what we now usually refer to as art, in particular modern art, contemporary art, is something a radically new phenomenon, namely which came out of this strange being cut loose condition of a whole swath of creative figures and kind of an industry. It had to reinvent itself, and what did it become? It became this kind of very interesting and stimulating and potent la pour la world, which became, in my view, a kind of mutation and brainstorming chamber for all sorts of new developments and unfinished and raw experimental projects, whether this would be as a kind of experimentation chamber of many of the other creative arts in the plural, which continue to become the design disciplines, including graphics, media, film, photography, product design, and architecture. We are actually not part of this. This is something, there's a bifurcation here, and painting and sculpture and the arts and architecture was part of this, is now part of the design disciplines, and there's something radically new happened, which is in a dialectic with these design disciplines, which separated out an avant-garde segment, which becomes close and uses the art world to experiment, where you don't have, and we, for instance, have done a lot of that. A lot of our early concepts were kind of understood as inverted commas art, our dysfunctional, semi-functional furniture, our early buildings, they become manifesto, kind of art projects, art installations, and that's a huge kind of aspect of the art world, is feeding back and forth between the design disciplines and their kind of experimentation chamber. And that's what, it's not Benjamin's theory, that's what is my theory, connected up with Benjamin's thesis, what made the radical shift in the societal function of art possible, and what did it become? So originally painting and sculpture were just embedded in everyday life. There wasn't that kind of otherworldly discourse, which was just about confronting the real world with other potential worlds. It was just structuring real world communication, which is now taken up by graphic design, by the mass media, by architecture, product design, etc. But another theme is that new media have been transforming modes of perception. And Benjamin's in particular talking about photography. You can have you can investigate scenes much more carefully, you can have close-ups, zooms, you can have broad perspectives, and there's a whole kind of new cognitive and explorative and world-revealing potency in new media. And I think that's an important theme for us when we now look at the digital media and how we confront ourselves with our design and design development. Reorganizing our sense of perception, our sense of time. Also, if you can have slowdowns and you can have recapitulations and rehearse fly-throughs multiple times, you get a very, very different sense of new aspects of the world. Relevant aspects become into our ambit of investigation and also design speculation. And I will come to that and show you some of the examples of that, very particular examples. Some of these themes were picked up in the 70s by somebody like John Berger. He even had a TV series at BBC about exploring that. And so this idea of the medium being very imprinting on production, and it's not just a kind of superficial frame, is something very important to reflect. Marshall McLuhan picked this up in talking about the medium is the message, which is a bit cryptic phrase, but what he means is the medium shapes the message and shapes it strongly, and there's a whole new world of messages which become possible with new media. And we're living in a world of new computational design media. So this kind of tool investment in tools and development of new tools, which is part of the contemporary avant-garde in architecture, is incredibly potent. And in terms of the revelatory power of this, as well as the kind of generative and creative power which comes with this. And is far too often in a lot of parts of our discipline dismissed as kind of a boffin, a techno, fetishistic investment. It's very, very deep and sociologically potent. This one is very important for me. The innovating artistic forms of communication is more progressive than progressive content. And Benjamin is talking about maybe literary investments. And you have a lot of, let's say, Marxist writers, novelists, who are championing the cause of the proletariat, etc., but with very, very traditional modes and means of communication, and don't reach out and transformative. And so he say, if I had to choose between somebody who's having the right contents and casting them into kind of traditional forms, or somebody who might be not aligned with the proletariat, but is kind of innovating on the technological, on the medium front, and the forms, the genres, the formal repertoires of shaping and representing, rather than the represented, he would align with those innovators on the side of form. And I've always been somebody who's also been aware of the importance and the progressiveness of formal research, formal proliferation, formal innovation. And we have some of the great formal innovators don't have to be and weren't kind of consciously invested in a progressive project. Let's say somebody like Frank Gehry, Zaha included, Peter Eisenman included, etc. So he's saying the progressive type of writer places himself on the side of the proletariat, is usually called pursuing a tendency or commitment. But he thinks the concept of commitment is a totally inadequate instrument of political literary criticism. It's in The Author or Producer, I think, a very potent piece of writing. So he's looking at not depicting relations of productions, but looking at how you actually situate it as maybe a writer or artist within new production relations and new production technologies, new techniques. And the progressive development of literary technique is something he very much pushes, and he is citing Brecht as somebody who is incredibly progressive, challenging not only on the content side, but the medium, and with this kind of technique of estrangement, or his investment in radio and anticipating a two-way potential of radio, etc. So rather than kind of a pro-proletarian writing kind of novelistic tomes, investing in wall newspapers, radio, traveling film shows, etc., something is pushing. And as well as new forms and genres. And I just wanted to put that out there, because we get a lot of people in the field who display their, let's say, their progressiveness, and it comes along with very, very retrograde solutions, inverted commas. So this is, for instance, in Germany, the Neue Sachlichkeit, which had this potential problem of retrograde forms of communication. So technical progress is, for the author as producer, the basis of his political progress. All of this, interestingly, what I'm looking at Benjamin, because he is trying to kind of grapple with that major societal transformation from the 19th to 20th century, the Industrial Revolution, finally also the full mechanization of also the consumption standards of the masses, and bringing the masses into the capitalist society, also on the side of as consumers. He's looking at that transformation. At the same time, you have the socialist revolutions, the masses are becoming clients, you have new political conditions. So this is a massive, massive shift. And architecture, of course, responds to this, and the solution, or that what has arrived through this in the 20th century was modernism. And I think modernism was very, very well adapted to this new industrial, mechanical, mass reproduction, mass society, which also was a society of homogenizing lifestyles, universal consumption standard, and was this kind of society of mass movements, of the assembly line, and of kind of endless repetition to deliver that one universal consumption standard to everybody. It generated these kind of visions, which were incredibly pressing and potent. This is the 1922, 23 to 25. Le Corbusier's series of major visions and plans for the 20th century. That kind of mechanical mass reproduction society, based on separation to radically different zones: business district, residential district, logistics and retail district, industrial districts, just separated out, each radically different, each internally incredibly repetitive. And this also becomes very legible in the landscape, the residential district and the business district. And I find this very potent, this was very radical, and we'll come back to this, that this vision became true, nearly one-to-one, globally within Le Corbusier's lifetime. As he looked back in 1965, he would have seen the planet and its built environment transformed in these images. But not only the urbanism, but also the architecture, the product design, everything. What was conceived in the Bauhaus became a total remaking of the built environment, the world of products. So we need to see what the built environment's contribution to society is. For me, it is ordering of social processes. And in this case, an industrial city was that division of labor, separating out the 9 to 5 commuting between these segments of life, and also displaying that homogeneity as becomes visible and communicated in the urban landscape. And but this kind of ordering of social processes has always been the built environment's contribution and achievement. We often talk about kind of shelter and keeping the elements out and wild beasts out. It's more about structuring the social process, the social order being embedded and can accrue and accumulate and evolve and grow with a spatial order it could hook onto. And you have kind of a growing social organism. It needs that substrate, that physically cross-generationally stable substrate to accrue and grow. And to kind of stabilize routines, social distinctions, as well as various activity distributions you can routinize and build on and orient in a more complex environment with more actors than, let's say, a flock of primates. And that this kind of differentiation, you can see it here, that the different types look different, they become visible, and they inform you about what's going on where and who belongs where, etc. And laying out the various cooperative structures of interaction. That there is more differentiation than the natural morphology perhaps offers at a certain point, and you start to mark and demarcate and put in graphic overlay to communicate the various characters, families, types. And I think that's very important. That has always been from the very beginning on, and there's no human society without built environment or settlement structures as the skeleton of any social structure, which would fall apart without that. But also you always find that articulatory graphic overlay, that ornamental overlay as a kind of semiological system of signification, which also, and is very important, involves always also working on one's own physiognomy. So we all self-styling now, but at the time this was much more regulated. So this kind of character mask will make the different social status groups and social roles recognizable. Once you go beyond the kind of flock of 25 where you have personal knowledge into hundreds and thousands of a city, you start more and more, you need these kind of investments in a semiological system. So from animal to human is, on the one hand, have the settlement structures to build a kind of superorganism in which we self-sort, and then this kind of investment in designing the personas. Of course, this still goes on. Of course, we have now, it's a kind of contemporary fashion system, which is far less, much more fluid, much more open-ended, but much more complex and varied, and with a much more degrees of freedom for you to self-sort and self-identify what you do. we identify and we characterize ourselves as a particular multiply affiliated intersection of multiple social circles, which is the modern condition of society, which Georg Simmel also was talking about. And theorizing the fashion system, actually, at the same time Benjamin was theorizing these changes in the art system. So the built environment's contribution to society is ordering of social processes. I say it via organization, which is kind of laying out and separating out and demarcating and through boundaries and thresholds, plus articulation, that kind of ornamental, making conspicuous, making kind of a signage system overlay. Articulation is always critically involved. And these aspects are those aspects we architects are in charge of. So the first question is, what's the built environment delivering to society? And which aspects of that are the architects, the disciplines, ambit and core competency? Not so much the technical engineering aspects, that these structures kind of collapse or what kind of heat transmission they have, all this kind of technical stuff. We tend to still talk all too much about. We're in charge of how it is an ordering capacity, in particular with respect to its also visual articulatory overlay. That's our core competency. How these spaces communicate their identity, their particular offerings relative to others through position, morphology, ornament, etc. So we're talking about the community capacity. That's what we are in charge of to deliver with respect to each and every project, but also if we talk about the discipline as a whole, as leaders of the field, worrying about the capacity of the discipline to cope with structuring social process on the level of intricacy, dynamism, and complexity of the contemporary condition. Are we actually geared up towards this? And of course, we have to then worry about the repertoires, the methodologies of the discipline, its intellectual resources, its critique capacity of self-critique, and there's a lot of lacking, and we need to think that forward and think that through. Some of these transformations have been made. For instance, modernism was rightly criticized starting in the late 60s and early 70s of lacking, having that kind of sterility and monotony and kind of lacking articulatory power. So the postmodernism, one of the slogans was, architecture must learn to speak again, or speak more, become more eloquent. This was one element. The next aspect was through deconstructism came in, architecture must become more layered, more intricate, more complex as we reconverging back into historic centers, or in central conditions rather than be kind of spread out into the suburban division of labor. These critiques have happened, but they're not well understood, and it's not well understood how parametricism, for instance, picks up these themes, radicalizes them, and continues that progressive adaptation of the discipline's capacities and resources with respect to the societal tasks of architecture in the digital era. So architectural design is progressing form, medium of communication. And I'm just from a few images that this is kind of, some of these messages, there are universals of the human condition and of architectural or the built environment's role within it. As I said, social order requires spatial order. That's part of becoming human and evolving. It's precisely, the built environment is in fact, I would say, something like the DNA of cultural evolution, because the DNA is a kind of material substrate which receives mutation, recombination, tinkering, and it's a material, I'm a materialist of course, there must be some kind of material substrate on which cultural evolution can operate. It's no longer operating only in our brains. Okay, there's brain plasticity, there's something we can new learn, but there's the social organism has to work on the built environment where these things accrue and evolve and become more intricate, and then we all hook up onto this. This has always been the case, and you can see here that there's various intricate demarcations, divisions, everything becomes a kind of sign, and in traditional society is much more rigidly allocated and tied in with rituals, etc. But what I'm pointing out here is that we should start to work on this aspect. We can't just stare at drawings and models. We need to see how these are involved in structuring interaction processes and making these more effective, much more intricate social cooperation processes we need to order and make relevant. So the medium and technology of representation delivers a whole new empowering way of seeing and designing. It picks up that Benjamin scene of a new medium. So if we start, and I'm saying once we can, we always must look at our propositions, the way we want to dissect space, what that means in terms of structuring and channeling and sorting, ordering and animating, and then the interaction processes. That's what it's all about. Only in a very kind of routinized condition where this is kind of nearly trivial, where you know already what's happening because it's just another residence, another office with 3, 4, 4 elements in the schedule of accommodation, you can close your eyes and know what's going on. But if things become more complex, more rich, multiple audience, dynamism, you can't just stare at these drawings anymore. They will tell you nothing. You become agnostic about what you're doing because you're not reproducing just a kind of stereotypical condition like we were used in the 20th century, where you can abstract from all this. We need to start seeing this, making visible what we're actually impacting and doing. And so we need to bring, and I'm saying there is an architectural model is precisely that model which worries about the ordering of social processes, whereas there's other models, a structural engineering model, he's worried about the structural performance, and there are other technical models. Our models and drawings must contain the content, the meaning, the interaction process to be an architectural model. That's, once we can, we must. It becomes a compelling new form. So I'm going to see whenever you draw, you even when you start with a little bubble diagram, you have maybe an abstract dot representation of your brief isn't a schedule of accommodation of 10 rooms with stereotypical conditions, but your brief might be, a corporation, okay, 500 people of various categories. Throw them into the drawing, and then start drawing dividing lines and keep shaping that group, that social organism. So the agents have to always be there. And these agents aren't kind of sitting on the same desk 9 to 5 and going only to 3 places, but there's a much more dynamized. We're meeting and browsing and interacting. So free agents self-select and self-sort into an architecturally offered order. If I run this thing, and to some extent, yes, they can now, they're facilitated to pair up like this into these kind of little groups. But of course, that's not natural. There could be other things. They could have ended up in the gap, so you can see that this isn't a physical necessity, but this is a language, some kind of a socialized into an institutions, and the meaning system hooks up to these spatial structures. So and the meaning is what happens, right? The meaning is the instruction, the behavioral instruction. That's the meaning, and that's why I'm saying you have a semiology where the meaning isn't now kind of in a voiceover, but directly, actively embedded in the models. When I developed the semiological project for a while, I was building the abstract language, like a traffic sign system, and I said, hey, and then there was a legend, and the meaning was kind of a separate voiceover, and I was saying, hey, you can bring the meaning into the model. And now we can operationalize the semiological project finally with an architecture, and once we can, we must. And I think it's important that semiology operates through communicated threshold rather than physical barriers. So that's why I distinguish organization, articulation, and signification. So there's something where you just order the social by distance, by physical barriers, by walls, lock, fences, and controls. That's one way to do it. It's very crude. Yes, there's certain ordering, and you don't rely on, of course, you still also rely on people kind of recognizing. They're not sort of running their head against the wall. They realize there's a wall. But this is much more intricate, and I use the analogy of the football field. That's the kind of model where you have social cooperation, interaction, and you have these thresholds where the rules of the games change. You also have tricos, you have different characters, you have the referee, the 2 teams, and you have various zones in which the rules of interaction change. And that's the way you structure and order something as intricate as a football game, which is then has certain potency, and you need that. And you know you need it. So for me, this is a kind of chiffre of what we're talking about. We're having each designated zone, each patch, each territory might have its own protocols of what to do within it. And that's the way the built environment lays out and distributes a huge amount of diverse kind of protocols of interaction. In a public space, you can be sitting next to each other, ignoring each other, you pass each other by without even looking at each other. In a private space, you suddenly have to recognize who is who, and then and in an informal space, you can chat about certain things. In a more formal setting, you can talk about other things. So the situational definitions, and there's thousands of different situations which need to be defined so that we can relevantly act together and get things done and be productive cooperatively in a communication society, relies totally on this kind of matrix of ordering. And the other thing which I like about this one, that in a dynamized world, these territories could also shift, expand, contract. We have a dynamized and kinetic environment, but it's still an instructional environment. In a way, we're all familiar to semiological system that's making possible the intricate coordination of thousands of traffic trajectories, and without this couldn't possibly work. And we can learn from this. We have the kind of semiological language which has evolved here, and various rules. But of course, this is only just parallel lives. It's a good analogy, and the built environment functions like this, should function this, and could be empowered to function much more effectively like this. So this becomes the project where we're saying, okay, develop something like traffic science system, a semiological system, a system of education for institutions like a university campus or a corporate world and so on. And of course, it's somehow in there, but very unsystematically, very noisy, very under-articulated, very crude. And you can imagine that oftentimes there's very little information. You go into a huge kind of bureau with hundreds of gridded gray desks, and if you come there as a consultant and you're not there every day, and that's more and more the case, you have no idea which department, which character is sitting in. So it's you're just kind of disorienting. So that has to be overcome. So what I'm showing here is little models where we work. If you, instead of that neutral same territory, that gray surface, and you give some structure, you can increase quickly that there's kind of a meaningful order emerging, where you cluster, where you move. And you give some structure to the built environment, and you give more structure, more information, more differentiation, you get a more intricate self-ordering capacity. Premise on freedom. This is not shackling. There's always a premise. There's much higher degrees of freedom than hitherto. Connecting up with structuring offerings, which then help the self-organization along, because there's kind of differentiated backdrops rather than kind of neutral, disorienting backdrops where you have far less meaningful encounters maybe happening. And I just want to show you that this also matters the question of phenomenological grasp, perceptual tractability of these things which belong together, act together, and differentiate conditions. You have often in built environment which has a lot of things, but you get a kind of white noise, strange sameness, and disarticulateness, and whereas you can impose through a compositional, graphic, inverted commas, artistic language, but fully instrumental with respect to structuring a field of interactions which orients you. And this is a very simple thing, a park and ride scheme. But imagine you had 2 car parks, a bus station, a tram station, scattered into a kind of suburban French landscape. They would just disappear, irrecognizable. That would mean dysfunctional, disorienting. And you can use compositional artistic means to pull this together, use curvature, use graphics, use the bus cuts in here, the tram cuts in here, etc. And to use all the technical requirements, whether it's demarcation lines, light posts, columns, roofs, they have a double function. They perfectly fulfill their technical engineering requirements, but they have a double function as a semiological and phonologically charged, conspicuous visual language. And I think we always knew that, always intuitively self-control when you look at the renderings, that you have this legibility, but I'm making it a very explicit project, and you can get something like this gun. So everything is brought under ruthless formalism, which is just kind of a graphic language which, for instance, assimilates these lampposts to these demarcation lines because they work together and pulling you along. These ones increase, become higher and higher to draw you closer to where you want to go. And then they kind of transmute into columns. The demarcation lines reappear as lines in the roof, as cuts, as light cuts and artificial cuts. So they're all, with very different pragmatic functions, have an additional shared graphic guiding, orienting function. And these cuts are exactly where the tram comes in, etc., etc. And you can see here that's the roof of the tram station, and this is the floor of the car park, and they have the similitude because they function together semiologically. So when I'm talking about the architectural project in distinction to the engineering project, the contractor's project, where it's about kind of fabrication concerns and so on, as the one which is closest to the client's project, which is really the desire to host a particular institution offering a social arena is opened up. That's what clients do. They open a restaurant, or they open a new school, or they're commissioning a new kind of headquarters for their corporate operations. All they care about is creating a sort of social situation, a functioning social process. That's all they care about, nothing else. And that's what we should only care about, because that's the end game. We're not fetishizing about liking this wall or roof. These roofs are just instruments of channeling and bringing us together, enhancing this cooperative process, this communication process, because we're living in a network society where all our productive activity is, in fact, communication. Physical production is all kind of outsourced to robots and machines, and we drawing together in these kind of urban super brains where we communicating, meeting for R&D, marketing, financing, to continuously reprogram these robots which are outside in the emptying out landscape, which REM is interested in, but I think it's not an architectural project. The architectural project is that super brain, which we need to organize, the organizational project, how to kind of distribute, connect up, channel, but also the phenomenological project, like that tram station, making perceptually, cognitively tractable and legible, and the semiological project developing a systematic system of signification. These are the architectural projects, and they all tie in with social functionality, and to be distinguished from the engineering project and the contractors project, let's say. Now, new tools to deliver this, and there's also, this operates on all scales. I showed you the kind of intricate configuration of several bodies around a table, chair, interior situation, but also on an urban scale. You have various ethnic groups self-sorting, self-segregating into districts and their characters and so on. And we need to start to look at the new sciences of complexity, emergence, local rules and global patterns. It's also the way we simulate social crowds. This is a kind of bottom-up, agent-based project, but it's also agent-based models will be very important also for urban conditions like this. And there's a kind of the science, the complexity science which looked at this. So we have self-organization, and we're moving into kind of a planned organization and in these urban patterns. What is interesting, if you look at the medieval city, it starts with this initial village enclosure, and then that's nearly natural. It's not a kind of Platonic obsession that you would make a circle. It's just the most efficient and most stable and robust way of enclosing a domain. So you get the circle, and then as you grow, you get the concentric growth. And nobody's thought of this as a natural outcrop of competitive material processes nearly. And then when finally the moment of architecture arrives, which is a conscious design, it is actually just redesigning, retracing what has evolved. But then, of course, you can rationalize it, you can make variant of it, and you have a huge acceleration where that slow physical accrual of orders is transferred to a new medium of paper, pen and paper, anticipating this. You have a simulatory realm, and you have a huge acceleration of architectural and empowerment for architecture since the Renaissance. And once you have all these inventive capacity, you also need to theorize and argue pros and cons. So you have architecture with drawings and theory emerging, and having a huge acceleration, and as part of the acceleration of the human project, modernity, since the Renaissance. And we're arriving at this one again. And what's fascinating is that this avant-garde vision becomes mainstream and is rolled out, and this is happening. We no longer love this because we're in a different stage, and it's no longer functional for us. But it must have been exhilarating to see one's vision be so kind of prescient and potent and catching on within a single lifetime of the heroes of modernism. I'm always fascinated by this story, that because both Le Corbusier as well as Walter Gropius, who founded the Bauhaus, and most of what we're sitting on and living in here is Bauhaus, still, as well as Mies van der Rohe, they all met in 1908 or 1910 in Behren's office, and 50 years later they look back and have transformed everything, and I want to look back into 30 years. I need some help to do that. But so Rem would call it a mountain range of evidence that he got something right. But at the same time, this is no longer viable.